Christine Pfister is a stop-motion animator and horror director whose shorts and music videos have won Best Horror Short at the London Shorts Film Festival and been named official selections at the Bucharest Shortcut Cinefest and Final Girls Berlin Film Festival. Her prop fabrication has been commissioned for Season 3 of M. Night Shyamalan's series Servant, a world builder with a keen sense of horror, humor, and the mystical aspects of the human condition. Christine graciously invited me to her studio in upstate New York recently. Before you listen to our conversation, you can learn more about her work and see her shorts at www.christinepfister, that's Pfister.com. Welcome to the Root Cellar. I'd like to thank you, Christine, for having me to your studio today. I appreciate it.
Of course, it's a pleasure to have you.
I'd like to start off by asking you how you would define your work.
It's kind of a mixed bag of haunted, cursed objects. Everything that I do, I describe as handmade. Okay. Everything it's the final product of most of my work is the animations themselves. And so a lot of the sculpture work I do to get there is really just for that end product. So for me, a lot of it is just as small detail as possible is the most important thing that there is on the screen. So, and everything has to be moving and shimmering, which means everything in each frame has to be handmade.
So when we say handmade, I've looked at a couple of your pieces that were really standing out to me this morning, Skipping Out and also Ghoul Log. And I was really impressed by even the smallest level of detail was so thought out and so just perfect for the experience. So you're doing all of this yourself?
Everything.
Okay.
So Skipping Out is actually just a little segment of a feature film that I've been working on for about 6 years that I currently had to put on hold because it just became too overwhelming on top of all my other jobs. And that's the thing about being a freelance artist is that often I'm called away for other jobs. And suddenly when I get back to my work, it can be 6 months, 8 months later, and my skill level is substantially higher than it was last time I was touching my project.
Okay.
So it's a strange thing where suddenly you're looking back at this footage that you did 4 years ago that you're still actively trying to work on, but you no longer are even happy with the puppets because you're now on to a new, more exciting, more beautiful looking puppet. So from that series, I'm trying to then encapsulate little moments like Skipping Out. And but yeah, for everything, each frame is handmade. So for the feature, it's funny because sometimes people will still reach out and say, is it out yet? Is the film done yet? And often, as annoying as this makes it sound, I have to quote Carl Sagan to them and say, if you want to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first construct the universe.
I like that. I like that because you are constructing universes. And
yeah.
That's wonderful.
It's hard to kind of let people understand the grasp of what that means. Sometimes it's like, okay, go watch a film and stop on any frame, look at every person, every set, every object that they're holding, every article of clothing. I'm making everything.
That's interesting because in a film, right, it's a sizable crew that's involved with that. There's an individual or several individuals for each of those details, and all of those are falling to you in this kind of production.
Exactly.
You've mentioned doing freelance work that maybe ups your skill level or opens new doors for you, and then you're going back to a more long-term project that you're working on. Do you tear it up and go back to the start? Do you keep with what you've done?
That's been kind of a struggle. During quarantine, finally just had to take a moment and step away from the project because I just got to a point where though I was able to kind of change, the feature film is half live action and half animation. So I have all of the live action segments. And a lot of it was just figuring out the best way to animate it smoothly together. The trickiness comes from growing so much, both, with my skill levels and with where I am, in that I wrote the script when I was 20, and that's no longer even close to being where I am in any rate. And so it got to a certain point where it's like, okay, well, I can animate these new segments, kind of add to this film where I am, add new layers to it, it's new storylines, make it what I want. And I just reached a point of thinking, no, I need to just make a couple shorts that are actually indicative of where I am right now and be more excited about it. Yeah, it just got to a point where I put so much pressure on myself as like, this feature, once this is made, this will be the thing that people will see and identify with me. And then it got to a point where I was like, that's not even the project I want people to see and identify with me. It's not where I am. But for, a lot of the jobs that I get that have led to me passing that point is I do a lot of fabrication for film, so a lot of prop fabrication. So anytime anyone's working on a project, I'll get these amazing calls like, hey, Christine, do you think you could animate like sex sequence with a tiny doll that comes out of a painting? Or like, do you think you could make a tiny model out of popsicle sticks of the Wizard of Oz house? Just these very specific jobs that every time when people come to me, I'm just so excited and honored to be a part of. And each one of those, I try to use new materials or try to use new techniques, even if it wasn't asked of me, just so that each project I'm working on can build and be a part of a bigger thing for me and a bigger learning process.
You just have the problem and it's up to you to solve the problem? Is that how it ends
Usually.
up? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, this one we have right here, this life-size puppet, that's for a project that I was called in to make her bodysuit. So it looks like she has a body under her clothing and her animating shoes and a wig for her. So it's such a wide range. So it's impossible to say no to any job because they're all so fun and so different.
Could you walk me through how you think about a problem?
Yeah, a lot of it is just kind of, I'm constantly trying to teach myself new techniques and really kind of master all of the both craftsmanship skills that I have and also just as many materials as I can master is always a thing that's really exciting to me. So when I get a project, a lot of the first steps are kind of figuring out what the actual material is going to be and going from there. And so if it's going to, be a hard base or a soft base and what the specific, often these things come with specific instructions about what they need or what they don't need for this piece. And so you're kind of, you're starting out in this box and trying to figure out how to weave your way out of it and, make something both that you're excited about and that fits all the requirements met for it. So I usually do rough sketches. Often those aren't even shown to the production teams of the films because they're not good sketches. It's more just like me making kind of almost patterns for what I will be making. And if I were to show it in my horrible drawings, they would not have me go to the next steps. So it's all just kind of mapping out for myself so that when I then approach them again and have the ideas sought out, I can usually have both a couple material tests to show them or a couple different options so that they can kind of see what they actually need for their uses.
When you get to the stage of showing your work, is there a lot of back and forth there?
It really depends. I do a lot of work with a few production designers and a few art directors who very much know my style. And so that is always very helpful in that almost there's no comment. They know that they're going to get a weird, creepy art piece back and that's what they want. And that's why they asked me to do it. So that's usually less back and forth than if it's a new client or a new person for the first time. For the piece I mentioned where it's like a man coming out of a painting. That one, there was a lot of back and forth because I created the doll, but it had to be based on this woman's portraits that she'd made. So there's a lot of back and forth just about subtleties of the facial expressions and about just minute details like that. But overall, I try to send some progress pictures unless I have such a good idea that I just send the end result because I know that that's what they wanted. So it's a pretty wide range. But for my usual clients, it's, they just want the creepy art pieces. So
they know what they're getting.
Exactly.
That's excellent. That sounds like a good relationship to have.
It's really incredible.
I'm thinking about Ghoul Log.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell me a little bit about how that came to be and
Yeah, so that was actually a really fun project. It was at a time in which I was really invested in my feature and kind of drowning in that. And suddenly I got an email from a woman who I had a few animator friends in contact with. And she was reaching out because she does a Christmas advent calendar well, it's called Creepy Christmas, but it's an advent calendar where each day of December, she releases one of the new creepy films for the festival. And there was a Russian roulette of what your word was, what Christmas themed word you had to go off of. This all sounded really exciting to me because, like I do also with music videos that I do, it's fun to just kind of take a break and be like, okay, these next 3 months, I'm going to just focus on making a really strange, wonky piece, and it'll just be done, and it will be a new, complete process. And when you're working on something for so many years, it's really exciting to have these times of like, okay, something's has to be done for this festival. So the deadline is there. And so I got my word, which was Ghoul Log, and I just was so excited. For me, I'm a horror director, but the most interesting thing to me are just tiny horror moments. So even though that film is a strange film about cannibalism, the most horrifying moments to me are all the chewing, because that's something that to me is horrifying. I hate hearing people chew. I can't stand the sound of it. And so the brashness of going back and forth, and I had a really fun time editing that, almost like a quilt of these moments that are meant to make you kind of jump, and just the discomfort of just mouths chewing, which were all my mouths and in different costumes. So a couple of gross days of eating radishes and prosciutto for a couple hours. Just kind of let myself just go wild with it and have fun. And that was the first piece that I really allowed myself to do something so dark, and since have been really excited about delving further into that.
The chewing scenes, they definitely stuck with me afterwards. And I also was just really impressed by the teeth. The teeth were just fantastic. And the seamless face, or is that an actor's face or actress's face, or is that the doll's? And then I watched it a second time, like, oh, I'm pretty sure. And I was really impressed by the smooth transition between the two.
Thank you.
I also, though, was taken with the hands, and I'd love to know why you made the hands the way you did. The look of the hands, they're just monstrous.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, hands are definitely a big part of all my work. They're always oversized. I just love both that feature, and also makes it a lot easier. It both makes it easier to animate. It means you can have a lot more close-up, small scenes of just the hands and the small motions of hands. And until the current iteration of projects I'm doing now, which involve replacement faces, that was the closest I had to movement in my characters. And so I kind of liked the idea at the time, particularly, of having the hands be the only sort of expression that you see, because the faces did not move past a chewing movement. And so that was where you could kind of get the full effect of their movements. But I've done so many iterations of hands. I've started, the hands for Ghoul Log are clay with wire in them. Since I have some that are roving wool, like finger felted. And then I have others that are silicone. So I'm constantly experimenting with hands and trying to make them as nice and creepy as possible. But their largeness is always an important factor to me, definitely.
Do you find you pay a lot of attention to people's hands generally, or?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. And also, I primarily consider myself a hand worker. Everything I do is by hand. Also, one of my full-time jobs is I work for a sculptor doing beading and weaving and handwork. So yeah, the whole textile part of my work is incredibly important to me. And also it's just kind of a point of pride, as for women, a lot of the arts that we've traditionally been involved in with acceptance have been handwork, have been knitting, crocheting, a lot of things sewing, a lot of things that a part of the reason why it became so popular among women is because it's things that you can stop, put down, and go do all the billion things you have to do before you can come and pick it back up. And it's exactly the way it was when you left it. So I love to incorporate. So for me, hands are just the belle of the ball.
Belle of the ball. I like that. That's nice.
I've always been a maker and a sewer. So my mom is a interior designer. So when I was 3 or 4, I started learning to sew. And I always knew that I was really interested in that and really interested in materials. By the time I got to high school, I was like drying clementine peels to make gowns out of dried clementine peels, and saving everybody's life water wrappers so I could make a very provocative recycling gown about life water. Then when I got to college, I kind of put it all on the back burner at first and kind of wouldn't let myself get too far down any art path, as I wanted to be more serious and studied human rights, religious studies, and then eventually got into film and religious studies as my majors. At first, it was just through documentary work. I became really interested in that as a way of kind of combining my interest in being creative and doing something more productive that I felt at the time. I loved animations as a child, but I'd never expected to get into it. And then, during college, when I had a professor who became a mentor, Peter Hutton, he introduced me to all the greats of stop motion animation. And it just kind of, from there, became so clear that it was the perfect combination of all my interests. So my senior year at college, I did a thesis project that was an animated documentary. And don't even know if I'd be able to watch it now, just in being such an early stage of me learning how to do all of these things, and the first dolls that I'd made for animation and all of these things that since then it's such a horse of a different color. So it's always strange to look back on the earlier work. But once I kind of allowed myself to realize that this is what I'm good at, that it's okay that handwork and the, understanding textures and textiles is a path that I'm allowing myself to take, I was really excited to jump into it. But for horrors, it took me a while. I'm a big horror fan, always have been. Dracula was my first work. But 3, Jaws was my favorite movie. I knew what I liked from an early age, but for some reason, I just never felt comfortable creating it myself. And I think a lot of that was, even with Ghoul Log, that had a couple of screenings that debuted out the original festivals online, but it was a part of a few gallery shows. And at each of these shows, people would come up to me afterwards and say, well, you are not what I expected. This isn't who I expected to make this. And that's kind of always been what I felt, that, I'm this a small woman with curly hair and always smiling. And so to make, these really dark things, I think it was unexpected at the time, but it's just so much more interesting to me. And especially with these like small horror moments, these like small devastating moments are so much more exciting to me than huge, gruesome anything.
How does it feel to get feedback like that you're not what they expected?
At first, it was a little disheartening just because I didn't really know what that meant or how to take it. Or, it's in some ways, I guess, a compliment to think that I'm not what someone would expect to make a cannibalistic tale. But in other ways, why not? My work is so niche and so strange that I'm never discouraged by any remarks, really. I mean, often people say it and see some things and say, what was that? What did I just see? My eyes can't believe what I just saw. Or these shocked reactions. And for me, that's just as good as hearing that someone loved it. Yeah. It's not for everybody. And that's totally fine because, of course, it's not. How could this be?
I have to tell you, I love Dracula, too. That was my very first favorite. When I was a little boy, I thought, oh, this is what a gentleman is.
Absolutely.
He was well dressed and everything. He was a murderer, but
everyone has their flaws, Yeah, I mean, that was my mom tells it that she was changing my diaper and I had this little Dracula toy and I held it up to her face and clearly in an attempt to scare her, start whispering, Dracula. So here, my mom thought that she had a horrifying child and I never proved her wrong.
What's the festival experience like?
It's much more exciting when you're able to have some kind of screening, or if you're in a gallery show or things like that, where then you can actually be there. For the festivals that I've been a part of, have not been to any in person. I'm never there and getting that part of the feedback. So it's all just kind of then what comes afterwards and reviews and things like that, which is nice. And a lot of it often is nice where it will then lead to other film festivals wanting the piece. But it's very separate from me. It's like once it goes off into the world, I'll then Google it later and see what comes up. But it feels very separate for me once it's out of my hands. So I often, think about when I'm about to release new things, like how I want it to be seen. And because it's so much of the work that I make creates this like huge amount of stuff that I need for each element, the props and the costumes and everything. So now I'm trying to think of fun ways to kind of have more of a setup where you can see either the sets set up before you see the film, or more of a gallery situation where you have characters, and these are the quilts of these characters. These are the monsters that live under their beds. These are their biggest fear, and having these sculptural elements that can kind of be another way to explore the films. Because when you're watching them, there are so many elements that you're never going to notice, because who's going to notice that I spend 12 weeks cutting grass and putting them on a piece of paper to make a grass quilt, or, no one, people don't notice these things. But for me, it's such an important element of it that, to have more comprehensive screenings is always an exciting idea.
What does inform your ideas and your work?
A lot of it is conversational. A lot of it is, I'm a huge Shirley Jackson fan, so I'm constantly rereading her short stories. But for me, it's actually a mix between her and Kandera, the two of them. Though he doesn't do horror, the mix of those two is kind of what I hope all my films will be. These very beautiful, slight moments of lightness mixed with these horrifying moments that you have no idea where they came from. So I'm currently actually, which is what I'm making my replacement faces for, in pre-production to do a short that I'm then hoping will become more of an anthology of shorts that all center around this really eccentric family who are all haunted in their own ways. So each short is going to be about either an inciting incident for their haunting or a part along the way. So much of it for me is these small details, and both in the actual making of things and also in the dialogue. So that's currently what I'm working on, these screenplays now that are just trying to be these short conversations, a lot of which I've had before or have thought too extensively about, and trying to figure out how to go from there. So it kind of varies. For Creepy Christmas, obviously, I had the nice word that was handed to me. It can be a challenge when you're going into projects that it takes so long to complete, to be like, okay, this is it. This is the theme that I need, so that's why I'm excited about doing these smaller projects now that then can become a part of a larger endeavor. It would be wonderful if at some point I could afford to have a team to help with building certain elements. But overall, it's all just so connected in my process that I, at this point, wouldn't even know how to disconnect. For my feature, for the live action portion, I hired a good friend of mine as a DP, and it was wonderful. But I don't know how that would translate to animation. For me, I was a part of this article from the Hudson Film Commission about animators in the Hudson Valley and how quarantine changed their lives. And for me, the most depressing block of the article, I was like, well, my life's the same. I'm an animator. I can't really leave my house. I have a lot of work to do. It's me working 14 hours a day trying to get stuff done to move to the next day to do the same thing over again. So it's a very isolating thing, which is, I guess, a part of the reason why I'm interested in the idea of having the screenings or openings be more of a part of it. Because for me, the kind of filmmaking I do is incredibly insular.
So since you're doing the photography as well in the directing, what's your approach?
I do shot by shot. I figure out what exactly I need. And then often I try to get at least 2 or 3 angles of each of those shots that I need. And often I'll just have a 2-camera setup so that I can at least try to get 1.5 good shots each time that I animate anything. A lot of it is just kind of figuring out, I'll have these things built, and as I'm building them, I'll often have the camera out so I can see both how much of the frame they take up, how things are looking. It's more of a mixed bag once I actually get shooting. I'll have a formalized list of everything I need to be checking off, but often, even if I give myself which lenses to use, what style of shot I want it to be, when I'm actually then in that shot, things can change pretty rapidly. And I like to give myself that freedom and flexibility, because often it's not until, I put my camera down to change the lights that I realize that where the camera is a way more interesting thing than what I had thought of. And I love being able to run with that. Whereas if I had a crew of 15 people who are changing the lights and changing the camera setup and animating with me every time I made one of these decisions, it's a lot more complicated than just winging it myself.
Yeah, it's not as easy to go with the feeling of it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a huge part of it for me, is just kind of like letting myself often I'll have certain rules per project that I'm trying to follow, that if certain characters are in it, it's more overhead, and certain characters lower lengths, more underneath. And just certain rules that I'll try to follow are, in a dream sequence, we'll use a wide lens and we'll try to follow things like that. But even if I have to break those rules to make it look like I'm continuing the rules, that's what I'll do.
You had mentioned earlier facial replacements. Could you tell me more about that and how that works?
So that's a fun style that I'm working on now. It's basically faces make roughly 24 basic facial expressions. I have a piece of paper. I can show you all of them. It's basically 7 categories that have 4 elements of degree, essentially, of like anger, rage, and concern, discernment. And so I personally like to use hard clay for animation. My professor always told me that claymation was like the easy way, the easy way out. And I've never let myself get past that. and it's also true for me too. It's what makes it instead of a claymation, a stop motion. It's the creepy doll element that you're never going to get if you can wiggle someone's face suddenly from the side. And I like the stiffer movement. So, but I wanted more movement in the faces. And so for a while I was experimenting with like composition eyes, of putting real eyes onto the dolls, which I liked okay. But what I was more excited about was this idea of the replacement faces. So basically you make one neutral face for a character in clay, and then you make a mold of that face. And suddenly you have basically a cookie cutter. So then you can make these 24 separate faces and make the slight tweaks. So you're not starting from scratch each time. You have the base face, and then you make the slight changes to make the facial expressions. From there, I drill out the eye holes and have separate mouthpieces. So the mouthpieces are interchangeable amongst themselves. And then I also recreate an additional 16 mouth expressions based on movements for speaking. So by the end, I have an insane amount of faces per character, and they are attached by magnet. So you just magnet them on and off the body. The eyes stay in place. And it's a much faster process than I would have imagined based on everything I just said. It sounds a lot harder than it is.
It doesn't sound fast. I will acknowledge that it sounds quite slow. I'll take your word on the fast part.
I guess comparatively, I'm speaking as myself, a stop motion animator. So I guess a week and a half per character face is fast for me.
Now, how do you keep track of all of these elements? You have dozens, if not hundreds of elements in a film at least, dozens in a scene. Do you keep that all in your head as you're moving through it, or do you chart it out?
A lot of it I chart out. So one thing about stop motion animation is that when you take a break from it, you can very much see it in the next frame. There's such a learning curve, even if it's a thing that you're doing all the time. If you're 10 hours into animating, you're on a roll. You know what you're doing. You know exactly how to make the movement slow. But if after you finish that scene, you suddenly have to then build everything for the next scene, that could be months. And then suddenly months later, you're animating again. And you don't want it to be the situation that you finish a scene and suddenly the next scene looks as if it's animated by someone who's never done this before. So for me, I try to build as much as I can before I get started so that the animation can all happen at once.
How do you know when you're done in a process like that?
A lot of it is just I go crazy enough that I need to move on to the next part. So, there's every time.
I love that answer. That's a very honest answer. Thank you for that.
Yes, of course. It's, you just kind of get to a point of suddenly realizing, oh, I haven't touched my camera in 6 months, and that's what I want. I need to get to that point. And if you have enough under your belt and enough of the materials done at that point, then it's a lot easier to then, throw a scene together. And you can, of course, last minute be like, oh, I got to make quickly another notebook, or I should paint this wall or add wallpaper. That's nothing compared to having 20 lists of pages of every item you have to make. And then once you get into that rhythm, it's nicer. A lot nicer.
So now that you've found a place of comfort with horror themes, where are you going next with your work?
So I'm very, very excited about this series of shorts that I'm doing right now. They're all very dark in their own way. Some of them one might not think is particularly dark, whereas others are, hopefully going to be full out bone chilling. So this is, it's more of a series of lineage and of these strange characters and how they're connected through their family and how they're kind of unable to escape the destiny of their family as being these haunted people who are very misunderstood. A lot of that too is just to, once I have 2 or 3 of those short films under my belt, then I'm going to put that together and try to turn it into a feature using that for grant proposals. The challenge with doing so much of the fabrication work is that often I am called away for so long that I don't have enough time to work on my own projects. And so this is a way that I'm trying to kind of propel that forward without it taking years and years to complete. Having my mentor always said that the most important thing for you to do is to constantly be building your body of work, especially in fields like animation where things take so long. You don't want someone to come and see your work and say, love this, can I see more? And you have to say, give me 3 years and I'll have something for you. You want to always be working on your library. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to focus on now, is to, for the first time ever, trying to start to say no to to jobs if I don't actually think that they're going to help or propel me in any direction, and focus more on becoming a horror director, because that's what I would ideally like to be doing more exclusively.
That sounds scary, to say no.
Doesn't it? I know. I haven't done it yet. I'm practicing saying that maybe I'll say no. But no, I'm currently working on 4 jobs because I can't do it. I can't pull the plug and say no.
I'd say no.
I have one full-time job that after years of manipulation and maneuvering, I've been able to turn what everyone else does into 5 8-hour days into 3 12-hour days, so that the majority of the days are my own. And that, for me as an animator, was the biggest decision I could make, because it takes hours to, even if I'm at a point where I can start animating, it takes hours to set up. So if I come home every day at 5, already tired from having worked 8 hours, there's only so much I can get done. I'm not going to be starting to shoot. And that's very different of having 5 days like that and 2 days to actually work versus having the majority of the days to myself. When I take on other jobs, like right now, that time obviously that then gets twisted, and those 4 days then often get sucked up towards the other jobs. Again, it's, for some reason, it's always like when it rains, it pours situation. So I did have like 3 months to focus just on making the faces and getting pretty far in the story developments for my piece. And then in a 2-day period, took on accidentally 4 more jobs. That's the no word. You get ready, and then all of a sudden you're saying yes.
There may need to be some classes on the no word, it sounds like.
It sounds like it. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
But it's, again, because I do feel that all of those jobs go towards me becoming more skilled at what I do. That's a huge part of the reason why I feel that I can't say no, because it's really exciting to be like, okay, so I made this past year, I had the wonderful pleasure of making 2 horrifying marionettes for the M. Night Shyamalan's show. And it just that was the first time I'd ever made marionettes and used a different style for the faces because the scale was different. And it's exciting to finish projects like that and be like, okay, here's a whole new kind of puppet that I know how to make now. And now I can go explore that in my own stuff. And so, though it would be wonderful to have more time for my work, and I'm trying to like gear up to a time in which I can really just be doing that more exclusively, I'm incredibly grateful for both people trusting me to make these objects and for the ability to like grow my experience.
One of the things I'm also wondering about as I was thinking about something said earlier, it seems like your main collaborator would be your husband in terms of the compositions. Mm-hmm. And I did want to ask you about that. What is that like to be collaborating on your work with your partner?
Amazing. He's the best. It's incredible. I would go really wildly insane without him. He's so helpful, even in that, he'll come in here and I'm finishing up a puppet. He has kissed goodbye every object, every puppet that I've ever made gets a kiss of approval. And I think it's fun for him too. He's currently designing our home that we're going to build, and we'll come in here and I'm making tiny cardboard houses. And he's like, let's try this porch on our house. It's like, oh, is this the style you like? I'll try to emulate it. And with the music, he's just incredibly talented. So it's always so fun. Often for my reels, I'll put old songs of his over them. And people will think that it must be a soundtrack for it because his songs have almost a similar handmade quality to my work. So it's never has he put anything over my work that I've had any questions about. It's always been exactly what I wanted. So I'm incredibly lucky.
That's wonderful to be on the same wavelength about things like that.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it's definitely helpful. And he also has some experience in animation and is a designer. So if I'm having any kind of trouble with how to animate something or the looks of things, then he'll often come and give advice.
When you're done with production, it seems like you have a lot of set pieces and sculptures. And where do they all go?
It's a wide range. Some of it I hold on to. I keep a lot of the bodies. They're in some of these drawers. Different characters that I keep. A lot of the set pieces, unless I'm madly in love with them, I'll just get rid of. Partially because even with my own work, I feel that I can get better always. So, it's similar. Like I've had experiences where I've been working on an animation for 4 weeks and then somehow my 2 hard drives break and I lose all 4 weeks of animation. But I'm at a point that I'm not, instead of getting even sad or frustrated, I'm like, okay, I now have the skill and ability to know how to do this, and now I can do it better. And I have to think of things that way. And it's
That's
true.
impressive. That would paralyze a lot of people, I think.
Yeah.
To lose that much work.
It's hard. It is hard. It's not fun. But when I then do it again and see how much better it is than the first time I did it, well, what can I do? I can't continue to be mad at myself and have a product that I'm happier with in the end. So because I'm always kind of on the edge of like trying to get better and knowing that everything I do is making me better. It's hard for me to hold on to things with so much sentimentality unless I know that I'm no longer going to be making puppets in this style or hands in this style. And then I keep it so that I can have the comparisons. But because the final product is the film, I'm often a little too careless with a lot of the set pieces.
Thank you for having a conversation with me today about your work. I've really enjoyed it.
Me too. Thank you so much for coming. It's been a pleasure.